It's 8 o'clock. The show comes up, the titles roll, and it's the final episode of your favorite show. You've been with these characters for 8 seasons, and now it all comes to an end. Welcome to TV Guys. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we are talking about the top 3 best series finales of all time. And boy, we've got some good ones on here. So I've got a bunch I've got 3 that we're obviously going to do like the top 3, but I've got like a bunch that I can talk about because there's so many shows that do series finales well. And so, I actually, even in my top 3, what I'm going to do is I kind of have like one from different categories. And so you'll kind of see what I mean. But it's like, it's really hard because I kind of wanted to do all 3 like sitcom ones because sitcoms just do really good. Michael Schur, we've talked about him as a show creator. He does a really good job at ending his TV shows. He's like great. All of his TV show endings, Office, Parks and Rec, Good Place, all of them are really good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I had some trouble too because I wanted to get ones that like were really good finales. I thought about doing the Fresh Prince finale, and actually I watched both parts of it today, intending for that to be my number 3. But I was like, you know what? The show is really good, and there's some good moments in it, but I don't know. It just didn't really hit home for me that well. So I was like,
yeah,
do I just go with it since it's – but I came up with what I think is a better one in the last like hour.
I left off one of them. I really toyed with number 3. I know what number 1 and number 2 are. I knew for a long time what my number 1 and number 2 would be. But number 3 was like that. Insert any of these good shows that I love. And like for a little bit, Scrubs was there. But we talked about it last week.
Yeah.
So the one really, really good ending that they had was just great. Then they had the 2 other ones that were like really bad series finales. And if you're like confused about that, listen to last week's episode. I kind of go into a little bit more about that. But the one that they had was really good. But since we talked about it last week, I left that off.
Yeah, and I intentionally, well, I suppose Fresh Prince could have been a backup, but I didn't want to have any backups because I was kind of hoping that me and Matt would have at least one overlap, which would kind of free us up to have more time to talk about some of these.
I'm not sure that we're going to. We might. My number 1 you might have on there just because it was such an amazing TV show and a great ending. Okay. So you might talk about it. But let's go and jump into it. Let me hear your number 3. What's number 3?
Number 3 is the one that like I said, I just kind of picked last minute, which is the finale to Malcolm in the Middle.
Okay. I watched the show. I don't remember the finale super well.
The finale, it does kind of like that, wrap up at the end. They go through all the characters and see what they're doing, but it's not like a picture perfect. Everyone's so happy at the end. Like their lives are still going, and like this family is always going to have its struggles, and so they pair that together. So the concept is Malcolm and Reese are both graduating high school, and Malcolm has been accepted into Harvard. At the same time, he got offered this like crazy good job. Like instead of going to college, he can go to this job and make tons of money. And Lois just kind of declined the job for him. And so they're heading to the graduation, and he's just like seething mad. Like his mom basically threw away this huge opportunity for him. And the subplot is that Reese wants to become a full-time janitor at the school because that's kind of Reese's path. Reese is the older brother. I'm trying to just jumping around if those of you who don't know the show. There's like the brothers, 3 main brothers, Malcolm, Reese, and Dewey, and they're all very different. And so like Reese is kind of like the delinquent, and he just couldn't really find his path. And so he just wants to be a full-time janitor. So his plot that he came up with his grandma, who played by Cloris Leachman, who died this week. So rest in peace, Cloris Leachman, was to create a mess that's so big that when he cleans it up, they'd have to hire him. Like that's his big plan. I'm going to create this huge mess. And so he's got this big tub of like mud and poop, or I don't know. It's just this huge, like gross sludge that's in the car that explodes inside the minivan all over the entire family. So they're about to go to graduation, and all of a sudden they're all hosing each other in the backyard, covered in like disgusting sludge. And this, while the whole family is covered in disgusting sludge, is when they have the big blowout heart-to-heart moment where Malcolm's mom tells him, like, yeah, I turned that down because this is your path. You are supposed to go to Harvard and be like crapped on, and you're going to work harder than everybody else, and no one's going to appreciate you. You're going to work your way up. You're going to become president, and those experiences are going to make you the best president for people like us. And Malcolm's like, what? And everyone's like, yeah, I thought you knew that. You were supposed to grow up and be president. And Hal, the dad, is like, well, our expectations for you weren't this high to begin with, but then you kept raising him, and so it's kind of too late now. And it's it's just absurd. Like, the whole family knew, yeah, Malcolm's going to grow up and be president and go through all these experiences, and they never told him. And at one point, Hal just says, you don't get to just go have the life of luxury and be rich and happy. That's Dewey. And Dewey's like, wait, really? And at the end, they show the montage. Like, Francis, the oldest brother, he's got a good job. Reese is the janitor. Malcolm's also a student janitor working at Harvard. So they show he is, going to Harvard, and he is working his way up and all of that.
The prequel to Good Will Hunting, right?
Pretty much. And it seems rambly, but it's just like, it's taking our characters into realistic spots where they're going to be in their next part of life, but also just doing it in a way that fits this family. Having this heart-to-heart moment, how outrageous it was, while everyone's hosing themselves down in the backyard full of sludge, like, that's the kind of show this is. And like, that's what that fits that family. And it's a satisfying finale for me.
That's good. Yeah, there's some finales that are like super bittersweet when it does that. Like, I'll say like House was kind of bittersweet because like the way that House ended was that Wilson got cancer himself, and House kind of goes into like this depression. He fakes his own death so that, because I think he was wanted by police or whatever for violating parole. So he fakes his own death so he could have just a little bit more time with Wilson, so that in Wilson's final months, House is there for him. That's how the show ends, which is, it fits those characters, but it wasn't like satisfying so much. It's like, okay, I guess that's a way to end it, but it wasn't quite what I was hoping it would be. Yeah. So it's good. It's a hard line when you're going to go with something that it's like, this isn't happy, tie everything up with a nice little bow for everyone. It's hard to always know exactly where to land with the tone.
Yeah. And like, kind of along those lines, that's why I didn't put Friends on my list, spoiler alert, because I was never super invested in Ross and Rachel. And it's like, the whole, I got off the plane, that didn't really, just stay on the plane. I don't care.
I liked that. I don't have Friends on my top 3, but I figure we should talk about it because it's a very influential finale. Friends was, to me, it was a really good finale. It's the whole heart of the show was that Ross and Rachel thing. And, they did Will They, Won't They, one of the best that you would see in TV shows. I know there's a lot of other shows that do it well. Don't come at me. I'm not saying they're better than your pick. But when you think of like a Will They, Won't They couple, a lot of people will think of Ross and Rachel. So it's great to kind of see how they were able to resolve that. And it was a nice finale, but it's not good enough for my top 3.
No, I think the Will They, Won't They, before Friends, the standard Will They, Won't They was Sam and Dan on Cheers. And then
I thought you were going to bring that up. I thought you were going to mention them.
But yeah, Ross and Rachel took that over, and I think they kind of still have the mantle. I mean, Jim and Pam kind of in The Office, but everyone knew they would, so it wasn't kind of a will they, won't they. It was more of a when will they.
Yeah, and they did a good job with Jim and Pam of not stretching that out too much. They made their characters, their relationship. It ended up their relationship was a little boring in the final seasons before the last one. So they're like, let's have them fight in the last season. And that was like, maybe that's not the best way to go about it. But, that's not the worst thing that The Office has done. So,
oh yeah, this is what I forgot to bring up. Way back when we were talking about The Office, we're talking about how the camera crew had so much integrity they couldn't intervene during Dwight's fire drill. But when Pam's sad, the sound guy can shut everything down and be like, Pam's sad, guys. We got to talk to her.
Well, he got fired. I mean, sure, he got fired for actually hitting the one guy and saving her from getting punched. But still, dude was not a professional. Come on, man.
Yeah.
All right.
Matt, what's your number 3?
So my number three, I told you one thing that I was going to go with. If I could have gone with this, I would say the movie Serenity as a finale to the TV show Firefly. So if you don't know a whole lot about it, I can't. Technically that can't be my number three. So I'm just real quick want to touch on it as an honorable mention. But the movie did one of the best ways I have ever seen of like salvaging a one season TV show. So Firefly was a great show. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, but because of a number of different issues, such as airing it out of order, episodes out of order, or just putting it in a crappy time slot, Fox kind of had this weird like sense that they wanted to kill it before it even got its legs off the ground. They just did everything wrong with it. So of course it gets canceled, and people start watching it once it's canceled, like, wait, this was a good show. We need to bring this back. So they're able to get this fan service going to finally get them to green light and put some money behind a movie just to wrap up all the loose ends, because there was a lot of loose ends that they left open. So they wrapped up everything really well in this one movie, and the movie is so intriguing and it's so captivating. And I saw the movie before I even saw the TV show, and so it was kind of funny because like they did a really good job of setting up the characters for the movie so that you're not missing anything going into it, having not seen the show. But I'm sure people who saw the show first appreciated it more. But it was just really well done, very emotional, and great send off for characters, and they weren't afraid to kill some characters that people loved. Good job. Yeah. So I will talk about this other show that I don't even know if you've ever seen. Have you ever heard of a TV show from the 90s called Reboot?
Heard of it.
I loved Reboot. It was an awesome TV show. So the whole point of Reboot is it takes place inside the mainframe of a computer. And so there's the characters that are all like, and it's like this CGI show. So all these characters are things that you'd find in a computer, and they're all representative of it. So, they live in the city of Mainframe. And one of the highlights of the show is that like pretty much every single show, there usually is a game that the user, they call it the user of the computer, launches. And so then they have guardians who are there to help protect the city, because when the user wins, it can damage parts of the city, and it can also kill people that are there in the game that get captured and caught in it. And so once you're in the game, you have to finish out the game, or else, there's no other way to get out of it. So it's an interesting concept, and it was pretty intriguing, and I really enjoyed the show. But the final season, what happened, there's this character named Bob that you really loved. So the main characters, there's Bob and Dot, and they're a little bit like a will they, won't they. They never really have a romantic thing, but a lot of people think that, that's where it's going to go. And then Dot's sister, he's like a 12-year-old kid named Enzo. So those are really the three main protagonists of the show. Well, at the end of like season 3, Bob goes into a game and he's not able to beat it. And Enzo and Dot are on the outside, and then they hear game over, the user won. And it's like, holy crap, they killed Bob. In this kids show, they kill Bob. And so what they do in season 4 is that they get Enzo, like they have Enzo actually grow up, and they kind of start off later where Enzo and this other girl that he meets, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, they go into these games and they change like their little status symbol thing so that once the game's done, they can travel with the game across the internet. They can travel to other mainframes. So they go off and they start looking to I can't remember exactly how it started, but I think it was like a survival technique at first where they were going to lose the game and they had to do this so they wouldn't die.
This kind of sounds like Wreck-It Ralph 2 a little bit when they go into the internet.
Yeah, it is a little bit of that. They are trying, yeah, and that's exactly that, or the Emoji Movie, which we don't talk about. They're trying to come back to mainframe. Season 4 is them coming back to trying to get back to mainframe, and that's the final season. So Enzo and this other girl, all grown up, they're traveling to these other mainframes, and they have their adventures there. They bump into Bob on the internet. They find him. He had been like sucked in, and he did the same thing. And so now that they are reunited with Bob, it's like no time has passed for him. And Enzo is like a lot older. He's like this grizzled, gruff guy. And Enzo as a kid was like fun and free loving, but like Enzo is like this PTSD, like soldier type Rambo, like really strong, no nonsense character. So it's like this little kid goes to that, and it's kind of sad that final season, because it's like all of the good natured fun of the first couple of seasons, it's kind of gone. And so it's in favor instead of like this more gritty season 4. But anyway, in the final episode, they get back to Mainframe. They're there. They're trying to protect the city. The city, like Mainframe, has fallen apart without Bob, and so they're like, one more game over is really going to push the computer over the edge. And they're just trying to hold everything together. They are able to reconnect with Dot, and it's just like, this is not the home that they left. And then they're realizing, like, wait, this is what we need to do to save the computer. This is our only shot, is to let the user win again and let it just destroy all of Mainframe. And then the user might fix it, like bring it back. And so they do, and like they see all their friends just like, it's almost like Thanos at the end game, and like they're disappearing into dust and they're just getting deleted, and all of Mainframe is getting wiped out. And then it just goes to black. And then it's like this DOS program on there is like, there was a system error. Would you like to reset or reboot or whatever? And then so like you see the user typing. Then it reboots Mainframe. Everyone's back, and it ends with the little kid Enzo coming out. Even though the adult Enzo is still there, the little kid Enzo comes out and sees Bob, and like, it's like, Bob, you're back. And then looks at the adult Enzo and is like, who are you? And so like it ends. I'm not explaining it with the emotion that was in that show, because I saw it like as a kid, and I was really emotional. Just watch like these characters that I love, this home that I love, get destroyed, and I'm like, is this how you're gonna end this show? And then to see Enzo get to come back, and like to this old guy to get his youthfulness back, like the innocence of this kid is back, the joy in the heart of the show is back. That was, to me, very emotional, even though it's probably, if I go back now, it'll probably be cheesy.
I kind of want to see that show now that you mentioned it. It seems like I like high concept shows where it's like you have to kind of understand things, where it's a little more complicated than just kids hanging out. I like when there's a cool premise to it, which that show seems like it has a cool premise to it.
Yeah, the games that they would play would always be like the highlight. Those are so interesting. Like, oh, what is this game that they're doing? There'd be stuff that happens in Mainframe, but that the stuff that is happening in Mainframe is going to bleed over the drama into whenever the game shows up in that episode.
You said at the end they just like basically destroy everything and then restart?
Yeah, it gets destroyed, so the user just kind of does like a hard reboot, just like resets the whole computer, and then it's like Mainframe back in its heyday again.
I kind of like that concept. I mean, this was animated, but when live action shows do that, when they know it's the end of their season or something, and they know they're not going to be using their sets, they just destroy them. That's one thing that Power Rangers did really well. Like the end of Mighty Morphin, their command center gets blown up to pieces, and they get a new command center. And then a couple seasons later, that one gets invaded, and they all just destroy it. And it's like, it's kind of jarring, and it's kind of cool because like the producers are like, well, we're done with this season. We're not going to use this space anymore. So let's just film an episode where we just trash it. And it's cool because it's just jarring, because it's like that was always the safe space, and then it's been just destroyed and demolished every time.
Yeah, my number 2, you're going to see the set gets destroyed in the final episode. And so there's a little spoiler for you for in a couple minutes from now as we talk about it.
Well, my number 2 is a controversial one because a lot of people hate the finale. And I think some of our listeners might hate the finale. But we talked about it last week.
Why'd you say their names? Because I know that you're thinking of certain people.
If you're listening, you know who you are. I'm talking about the finale of Lost.
We kind of brought this up a little bit last week. I don't know how much we kept in there, but I actually like it. It's not on my top 3, but so many people hate the finale of Lost, and I think it's just because of the expectations you had with it.
So there's kind of 2 main things. There's the On Island, and then there's a Flash Sideways. So just real quick, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. So in the last season, there was a Flash Sideways. It's like an alternate universe. What's going on? That alternate universe is the afterlife. So at that point, the characters have died, and we don't see them all die in the main timeline, but this is supposed to be, long time after. And then on the main island, they have that finale. So on Island, the show gets really sci-fi, but I kind of like what they do with it because it has some callbacks and some stuff that you can see they've been planning for a long time, specifically with like Locke and the Smoke Monster and with Desmond. I don't know, Matt, how do you explain this? There's like a cave with a magic light in the island.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the heart of the island is this cave, and all of like the good of the world flows out of this cave. And it's got, like you said, he's got the light, and so Jacob, the man that has been kind of this mystical figure, is in charge of protecting the island, and so now he's giving that protecting duty to one of the lost candidates, the people on the show. So
Yeah. So then there's also the smoke monster, who's kind of like the embodiment of evil. And in the last like season and a half, he becomes like a main character in the body of John Locke. So Locke dies in season 5, and so from then on, anytime you see Locke, it's not actually Locke; it's the smoke monster in his body. Yes, I know it's weird, but it works.
just go with us on this.
Yeah. And so like the only way, so he's bent on killing, because the point is, if he can kill Jacob and kill all of his candidates, and he can't directly kill them, he has to like orchestrate scenarios where they kill each other by accident or something. So if he gets all of them dead, then he will be free to go like spread evil throughout the world. So then they have to keep him there. They found out the only way to kill him is to reset the island by taking out this cork that's down in the hole. And then
see, it's kind of like Reboot.
Yeah. Once that's done, then he becomes mortal. So, I'm kind of skipping a little bit because I kind of want to talk more about the Flash Sideways stuff. They then eventually get Jack down there, and Jack unplugs the island, basically, and then they're able to kill the Man in Black. And then, or no, Desmond did that. Desmond did that because Desmond, he found out he has like special properties with him, and Desmond is able to uncork the island without it killing him. And then Jack and Kate are able to kill the Man in Black, and he's like the smoke monster is finally dead for good. And then Jack goes down because Desmond has been just knocked unconscious. He's able to take that cork, put it back in, which the strain of doing that, and he gets like ejected out of that cave, and that kills him. So the last thing we see in the main timeline is Jack dying as he looks up and sees the other castaways who've made it flying away to safety on the Ajira plane. If you're lost on Lost, it's it's hard because like this is like a whole season's worth of lore and stuff that's been built up, but it's really cool because we have this built up from like way back in season 3 that there's something special about Desmond. Like Desmond turned the failsafe key, destroying the hatch in season 2, and it didn't kill him. And I think we're supposed to believe that like that's because Desmond's got these special properties about him. Like anybody else would have been like disintegrated when that happened, which is why when he wakes up in season 3, he's naked because his clothes have been burnt off, but somehow his body is safe. And they keep that going because Desmond leaves the island.
Not the nakedness.
Yes, he's not
and
naked.
He stays naked for 3 seasons.
Like Desmond leaves the island at the end of season 4 with him, and he's barely in the last 2 seasons. He pops in every now and then, but I kept thinking like, why do they keep him in the main cast? He's in like 4 episodes or whatever, and it's because they wanted to keep this open to bring him back. I think they knew that this is what they wanted to do. They needed to have this set up so that only Desmond could do that, which is cool planning. And then what else was I saying?
Flash Sideways, or are you done with the main plot?
I think I'm done with the main plot. Do you think there's anything else we missed with that?
Nope.
Yeah, so then the Flash Sideways, it's kind of cool because you see all these characters and they're living some version of their lives. Like Sawyer, who was a con man, is now a cop. And Daniel Faraday, who always wanted to do music, but his mom always pushed him to do science, he's now a musician. And it's kind of like working out their stuff and being able to just make peace with their life. And at the end, like our core main characters all meet in a church, and they recognize that this time that you spent on the island with these people was the most important part of your lives. Because we see in flashbacks, all these guys, for various reasons, come from really traumatizing, sad lives. Like at one point, Jacob says, "I didn't pluck anybody from a happy existence to bring you to the island." And so they made their own little family, and so they were able to kind of make peace with their lives and finally wake up and realize that this is what happened, and move on to the afterlife.
And so as Brian, you clarified this last week, the Flash Sideways is a purgatory, but that doesn't mean that the island was purgatory. Okay, so this Flash Sideways that's introduced at the very beginning of season 6, the first episode, that is like them once they have died. So all of them, it's like at the end of all of time, this flash sideways happens. It's kind of outside of time. And so then they're all there, and suddenly like they're in this flash sideways, and they don't have the memories of their life except for when they get close to people that matter to them from the island, and they see things that spark the memory from this life. And so then that's when they start to realize what's going on, and then they kind of come to peace, where it's like their soul, it gets merged with the body of their past life or whatever, and then they're able to move on together.
Another really cool thing about it is, when they bring back Juliet. So Juliet died in the beginning of season 6. And when she was like on her like last leg, she's dying. She's muttering stuff that you don't understand, like, "Hey, let's go Dutch," and you don't know what she's talking about. She seems to be mumbling nonsense. But then here in the afterlife, you see her version meeting Sawyer, saying, "Let's go Dutch with like a vending machine candy," or something like that. And now you realize that what we saw back then when she was dying was a little crack into the afterlife, because her soul was moving on.
Yeah. Why do you like this ending? Why in the face of all of the people who said burn Lost in the season finale or series finale, why do you like it?
For one thing, there's two ways to watch Lost. There's the way where you're going to watch Lost, like, okay, I want them to answer every single mystery. I want to know exactly, it's like a puzzle. I want to know every little detail. If that's how you watch Lost, you're probably not going to be satisfied. If you watch Lost for the characters and their connections and watching these people live their lives, then I think it's more satisfying. I still think that there's some answers that they could have answered, and that's subject for a different podcast, but I think the characters themselves, it's just fascinating to see what goes on. Like, for example, with Ben in the afterlife, he was such a bad guy for so long. He did so many bad things, and he just kind of turned it around at the end and kind of reevaluated his life. And so when everyone's moving on, he realizes, I still got to work out some stuff. I'm sure with Rousseau and Alex is my guess. That's showing that he's on a character development level. If they're not just glassing over, be like, okay, Ben's good now, he's fine. Like, no, he had so many years of being such a villain that he's got to spend some time working on that. And just those little details of doing that, or like the fact that like Miles and Faraday and some of these characters who were introduced later on, they weren't part of the church. They didn't move on, and you kind of get the feeling that maybe those guys are going to have their own revelation, and maybe those guys are going to meet up and move on together at some point, but kind of just bring it right back to the original. Like, these were the characters that made the show popular. These are the plus Penny, who was there, who like she was only there because she was Desmond's plus one.
Yeah, that was on the invitation.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just think it's really cool, and seeing these characters' connections back, and they were able to get like almost everybody back from the whole series for the last season at some point. I don't know. It just really works for me when you watch Lost as a whole. And I sometimes get emotional watching these shows, because it's like, I've been following these characters for so long, and then it's like, it's over. Like these characters, like we're saying goodbye to these characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And that my number 2 is really going to is really good about that. But one finale that's very similar to Lost in the regards that you're talking about is actually Good Place. If you ever watched that show.
Yes, I did actually. That was a really good show.
So, yeah, and the finale is really good. That was one that I toyed with maybe making my number 3. But I really just love that idea of like, you still as a person, you have all of this stuff that you're working through all through life. And just because you die doesn't mean that your stuff is completely done and worked through. And so in the Lost finale, for instance, you see characters that they kind of have a second chance at the things that they messed up with when they were actually alive. And so you brought up like Ben with Rousseau and Alex, and he kind of redeems himself in the afterlife. And then same with all these characters. They all have these moments where they kind of redeem themselves, and, they make the right choice this time when presented with it. And Good Place kind of toys with that idea too, of like the, you still can grow, and there's a certain person that you want to be, and you're always trying to take steps toward that. And as long as you're always trying to take steps towards that person that you want to be, the best version of yourself, like you're on the right path if you're working towards that. So,
and I think the most compelling character in The Good Place is Michael.
Oh yeah. He goes from what you see him as at the end of season 1 to this the take it sleazy guy at the end of season 5. Is that how many seasons there were?
4.
4.
And it's like he's equal parts like all knowing and like wise at some points, but also just like immature and naive as well.
Yeah. He's such a fun character. He really is. Mm-hmm. They even managed to give the character that was supposed to have no emotions, they managed to give her really good characteristics and with Janet and gave her a good arc. It's crazy. Like, she's a computer pretty much. She's a computer program in the afterlife, and they gave her characterization. Yeah, I find that amazing.
And she's a great actress, especially that episode where they all are in Janet's body. So basically the one actress is playing 5 different characters.
Yeah. Yeah, anytime you see multiple Janets, like Disco Janet.
Yeah. Which was just like a one-off joke, and then they brought it back.
Gosh. It's a good show. If you haven't seen Good Place, if you like The Office and Parks and Rec, you will like Good Place. Go watch it.
Yeah, we're not going to spoil some of the twists, but it's a good show.
Yeah. I mean, Brian and I were both Christian, and watching Good Place, this is not your theology. This is, this is not what happens when you die. So don't take that into it. But
yeah, the head demon is not some guy named Sean.
Yeah, his name's Larry, obviously. So,
your number 2.
All right, my number 2. So my number 3 was like the sitcom-y one. I don't know if I'd call Reboot a sitcom. It's more anime, but bear with me. So my number 2 is more the classic show. Like, this is when you talk about a series finale, this set the bar super high for series finales. It is actually, I was looking this up, and I think I'm still right, that it is the most watched series finale of all time. With, I think, 108 million viewers. And that was back in 1983. So this show is MASH. I don't know how many MASH fans we have. I liked MASH a lot. I watched it mainly in syndication. I never have watched it like all the way through. I had a roommate in college that owned all the seasons of MASH for, some reason. I guess I shouldn't mock it because I like the show a lot. But the final episode, so MASH is like a 30-minute TV show.
We also have a listener who I know has all the seasons of MASH.
Well done. I can't fault you at all. It's a good show. The final episode of MASH is actually like a 2-hour finale. And so it's like this 30-minute show. All of a sudden, the final one is like a movie. And it's really well done. So MASH, for those who don't know, it's a show that takes place in the Korean War. It follows this group of doctor soldiers. They're medics there in the Korean War. They're taking care of those that get brought in, and they're the surgery unit to help take care of everyone that's wounded. And the big thing about this show is it really did well as a dramedy. It had a lot of comedy, it had a lot of dark comedy, but it never mocked the source material of the Korean War. The characters themselves would make jokes that are like, you're like, whoa, that's a little far, but they're right there in the middle of it. It's like their comedy is what they use as coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And actually this episode, the finale, starts off with the main character, Hawkeye, played by Alan Alda, who, by the way, he directed the final episode. He also was one of like 9 writers in the final episode too. There's a lot of care that was put into this finale. So the episode starts off with Alan Alda. He's in a military mental institution, and his arc in that episode is kind of going over like what caused his mental break. And at first, when he's talking to the physician there and like kind of giving his, like, recalling this one event that led to him being there, you just see the same old Hawkeye that you've seen before. But then as he tells a story, like, you see more and more things that he had repressed about that story are coming out. And it's like really good. It actually reminded me of, there was a House episode. We've already talked about House. There was a House episode where he was in a mental institution to start off the season. And it kind of gave me big vibes from that show. And so that must have really been influenced by this finale. But the finale of MASH does a great job with really all of these characters. It gives a sort of fitting end to every single one. And there's a long list of characters. And, if you had made this show nowadays, they would probably really find a way to bring back characters that were no longer in the show. Like two of the big ones that were on there for multiple seasons were the characters Radar and Frank Burns. And I think both of them they didn't kill off. There's one character that I know they killed off, which was weird at the time for a show in the 70s. You didn't really do that back then. But they didn't bring back these two characters. And I think if you filmed it nowadays that they would have tried to. But all the ones that they had in the season at the moment, they had great endings for.
That's a mark of a good season finale, when you actually don't just focus on the main character. It's about everybody. Because like we've been watching, we've been watching the lead, but we've also been watching everybody else. That's kind of the main reason I didn't decide to go with Fresh Prince on my pick. Because as I was watching it, it's like, yeah, Will has got some great moments with Uncle Phil and with Carlton and with even Jeffrey, the butler. But the female characters they're also there, and that's about it.
Yeah. There is, and everyone, they have a moment. Some of them are like really bittersweet, and some of them are like really heartbreaking. Like, I think probably the most heartbreaking one was Alan Alda's, because I'm going to ruin it for you. It's it's going on 40 years. Pretty quick, pretty soon it's going to be a 40-year-old finale, so you've had time to watch it.
Yeah.
The Alan Alda's character, as he's recalling this event, like you keep seeing more and more that he started off with like a beach day. Everyone had the day off because the fighting was a long way away and there weren't really any skirmishes near them. So they're like, well, we can take a day and kind of have fun at the beach. And then as they're coming back, then they're on a bus. And at first it looks like, they're all having fun on the bus as they're coming back. And then you realize, actually, no, there was a person on the bus. Well, how did this soldier get on the bus? Oh, because he was actually hurt. And so he was trying to tend to the soldiers that was there. And then they find that they had to stop the bus because there's Chinese soldiers that were attacking, or that they were close, and they had to turn off all the lights and everyone be quiet. And this was like, such a sad part of the episode when Alan Alda was trying to remember, like one of the Koreans was on the bus. She was holding like this chicken, and the chicken was making like pecking noise, squawking noises, and he was like, you need to shut that chicken up because the Chinese are going to hear him. It's like, it's making noise. And then you realize, like, as Alan Alda's thinking about it, it's like, no, it wasn't a chicken. It's like, to get the chicken to shut up, it suddenly stopped making noises. And you look down at it and it's like, she killed the chicken. And then he realizes, no, it wasn't a chicken. It was her baby. And she smothered her baby to stop it from making noises so that everyone would survive. And like, he just is breaking. I know he's breaking down in the side. And this is a comedy. Yeah. So like, this is what made MASH great. Is it never shied away. In fact, even at the detriment of I think it was on Fox. I think Fox executives were the ones who were saying, like, you can't do this drama side of it. You can't keep pushing it like this. And they did. And they're like, we don't care. We're going to keep going. And like, you're killing MASH. Like, no, we're going to do this because that's what this show is about. The show came out right before the Vietnamese War ended. And so all of these show creators are like, we created this show for a reason. Like, we're trying to mirror and show the pain and the horror of what some of our people are going through or have gone through. And they did a really good job. And so like that moment in the episode is like, holy cow, that's such a strong TV moment and really sad.
It's hard to toe that line of like, we're going to be super goofy, but then we're also going to be super serious and deal with real issues, because those real issues are what really cements you to the characters. They kind of brings it down to a realistic level. Like, dang, I feel for this character because that's rough for them to go into. I know Scrubs does that really well. Other shows do that really well, where you can be goofy and slapstick, but like the heart of the characters has to be based in something real. And like these moments really build that.
Yeah. And Scrubs does it well, but Scrubs is a bit exaggerated. I think that for when I first started watching it, it kind of turned me off a little bit. Just the characters are so big and so exaggerated. Mm-hmm. Whereas like with MASH, it was a little bit more subtle and subdued. And so like there was a lot more like these one-liners. So like Hawkeye and BJ back and forth, they had great one-liners back and forth. And that just felt like normal characterization. It never got too silly. That it always stayed pretty grounded, but it still was pretty funny.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't seen a ton of MASH. There's so many shows I want to see, but I don't know. We'll see what I watch next after I finish with Chuck, which I'm still watching.
Yeah, same here. But yeah, MASH is a classic, and this episode really, really deserved the audience that it had, especially for the time. I mean, you
Yeah,
can tell, like I said with House, you can tell how it influenced other shows,
yeah.
the way that it did its finale.
Right. My number one might seem like an obvious pick, and some of you might be sick of us talking about The Office, but it's our podcast, so we're gonna do it anyways. And yeah, The Office is my number one.
I'm so surprised that I didn't end up putting The Office on my list. I chose Reboot over The Office, but
I thought that either Lost or The Office would be on your list, but I think it's just like the perfect finale to The Lost. And it was all along, they had the perfect framing of it with the documentary crew. And like the reason for everything to kind of everyone to get together and kind of reflect on all these years is because in the universe, the documentary was released, and so these guys suddenly became like superstars, and they are like having these meetings, and we kind of flash back to, okay, well, how is Dunder Mifflin now that Dwight's running it? Like I said, it's what gets everybody together and allows them to have a realistic, like, emotional moment together. Sometimes it's like we, the audience, are saying goodbye to them, but for them, it's just another day. It's like, why are these people all getting together and acting all sad and stuff? It doesn't make any sense on some shows. Well, in this show, it's built into the show.
yeah.
And, we got to see kind of justice for Dwight because, Michael had his finale 2 seasons earlier. So, they brought back Michael, which was nice. And they did it in a realistic way. Like, of course, Michael would come to Dwight's wedding. But I'm okay. I know you mentioned that you kind of wish that Michael was in more of the episode. I'm okay that he's not, because once Michael left, we kind of closed the chapter on the Michael story. He got his ending. Whereas Dwight still was like so wanting to be Dunder Mifflin's manager. Like that's what he's been yearning for. That's why he was kissing Michael's butt all these years. And Jim even said to David Wallace, if there's anybody who loves the paper business more than Dwight, I either said I want to meet them or I don't want to meet them. I forget one, but he basically just said like, this is your guy, and kind of convinced David Wallace to give Dwight a chance. And you realize that, yeah, Dwight's still going to be crazy and goofy, but he's living his best life at this point. Like, this is not the kiss-ass Dwight. This is Dwight at his height. And we get to see, what is everybody doing? Like, Jim and Pam get to go off and have their life in Philadelphia. Andy finally gets his job in Cornell. It's kind of what you were saying about MASH, where they focus on every character and like their endings. And we get to see like all these different roads that these characters are going. Like even Stanley gets to go and retire in Florida.
Yeah. I liked a lot how they did this episode to begin with, where they're like, we're going to do a year jump and we're going to say like, this is an extra on the documentary, like for the DVD. That was a really good concept for doing this episode, to be able to say, okay, we can actually start at a point where you see, are these guys' lives on the right track? And for a lot of them, it really was. Even Kevin, when he was fired, like he's at least doing something that he really likes now. Like he's doing something that he's good at, even if he's a little upset that he's not at Dunder Mifflin anymore. And so I really liked, I kind of mentioned earlier with Pam and Jim how I didn't like what they did overall with the characters that season. They at least nailed the landing, because the whole thing with Pam never felt like she had a say in Jim's decision. And so that was really the biggest reason why she was not for Athlete. She tried to be there. She tried to be supportive. She tried to make his dream their dream, but it just never clicked. And so it was great to see once Jim said, you know what, I can do, I'm here for you. My dream is you, Pam. It's not this. Once he was able to say that to her, she sees him in this role and is like, no, you're meant for so much better.
Yeah.
And if that means I have to sacrifice things so that I can help you be the man that you are supposed to be in life, I'm going to do that. I thought that was a great moment for both of them to really choose each other.
It really was. And also just the Jim and Dwight dynamic too. Like Jim says from the beginning, you know what, this is going to be only good pranks. Just so like Dwight and Jim have had their ups and downs, but at the end of the day, they still care about each other. That's why, Jim is the one who arranged for Michael to surprise him at his wedding. And then at the end, Dwight, fires Jim for the sole purpose of giving him the most severance he can get. And it's like, these guys, I'm sounding like Zach Braff at the end of Scrubs. At the end of the day, they care about each other.
Wait, why are you looking up into the corner?
And then, but really, the best scene for me is that, and it might seem a little cheesy to some people, but the end scene where they're all in the office just kind of reminiscing, and then Creed starts singing that song, and they all have their little talking heads. That's just a great moment because it's both in and out of character. These guys are hanging out with each other, and I'm pretty sure at the end when they're all leaving and saying goodbye and hugging each other, I don't think that was scripted. I think they just told them, hey, walk out the door and hang out with each other.
Yeah, and a critique I have, of course, about the final season. We talked about how they really just did awful with Andy Bernard's character, and they tried to bring it back in this episode of like, no, he, all of the stuff he went through in this season, he learned from it, and now he's actually at a good spot. I never cared about that ending for him, but I will say he had one of the best lines of the episode when they're doing that reminiscing. Is like, I wish there was a way you could tell you were in the good old days while you were still in them. And that's such a great nugget of truth that just bums that you just got out of that. And it's like, it's so encouraging to be like, okay, I need to make sure I'm looking around and making sure that I'm not taking my life right now for granted, and I'm fully appreciating where I am.
My only complaint about that scene at the end would be that they have Clark and Pete in that scene, which for the most part, like they got rid of Nellie, they got rid of Robert, like they don't have any of those. Like Gabe wasn't in that scene. They kind of brought a core back to the characters we cared about from the beginning, or some characters came in later like Andy and Aaron, but like I don't know. I just feel like those guys came in the last season. I feel like they didn't really earn their spot to be in that last scene, but it's a minor complaint.
Yeah, it's a good pick. I really like how they ended it. I think I cried more though when Michael left than I did in this finale. I'm trying to think of like which episode. I think some of the most emotional endings for me were, as I said, Scrubs earlier and Boy Meets World. I think I cried the most at those two endings.
Yeah.
The in the classroom with Boy Meets World, how that ends. That's not my number one, but how that ends with them in Boy Meets World. I don't remember a lot more of the episode besides like that they're all leaving and moving on, but I remember the classroom scene where each one of the students comes up to Feeney and just like tells them what he means to them, and then they leave and he just says, "I love you all," and they're like, "Oh man, you guys, what a relationship!"
It's I love you all. Class dismissed.
Yeah, I know, but jeez.
Yeah. And they brought it back. The last scene goes way back to like their 6th grade classroom in the first season.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, in universe, why did they go back to the school classroom? I mean, it's a nice moment, but it's like, why did they go back? They're in college
obviously. Now. Because of the nostalgia. Even Feeney knew the nostalgia. You need that.
When you left the college, did you not go and visit your middle school classroom with your teacher?
Oh, all the time. I do that every day. Like, hey, professor, come on down on a 6-hour drive down to Nebraska. Let's take a look at my middle school classroom here.
I forgot you're from Nebraska.
I am. I'm a Cornhusker by trade. All right. So my number one is undisputed. My number 2 and number 3, people could make arguments to me that I could possibly in my life trade out and have different number 2s and number 3s. I could see myself changing as I get older. My number 1, I can't see that ever getting replaced. And my number 1's I did for category 2 because the final season of this show was very plot based. And sure, you had a lot of character development, and this ends in a good character moment, but it was also a lot of plot leading up to this. And that show was Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is like one of the most perfect shows to me. I loved how it just, the whole thing was, it started in season 1 and it was this slow burn. And as the seasons went on, more and more happened. And then in the final season, it was just like a runaway train just going off the rails. And so much happened in that final season that it's like you didn't think that they could keep topping it. And every single week you're like, that's where they're leaving us. I can't wait for the next week. And the best episode of the season was actually of the series itself was actually 2 episodes earlier where like everything comes to a head.
That one in the desert?
Yeah, everything like fell apart. it was just like you could only take so much pressure until it finally just exploded. What a great episode. But this final one is like, well, now Walt has 2 episodes. One of them was just him in isolation pretty much, but this final one was him coming back to clean up his mess.
Mm-hmm.
So he needed to, like, after everything that had happened, he needed to, for his money to not just be for nothing. He needed to find a way to get his money to his kids without the government stopping it and stealing it. He needed a way to get free Jesse. He needed to have his moment with Skyler where he owned up and said, no, it was me. I did it for me. I kept saying all along, I'm doing all this for family. I'm going to be honest. Finally, I can finally bring myself to say, I needed this.
I think he started doing it for family, but then along the way, it stopped being about that.
Yeah, absolutely. When he found, and that's what's great about Walter's character, is he was so repressed for so long, and he finally found something that he was respected at. And all this disrespect that he's accumulated through his whole life, he's like, why was I doing that? I am the best at what I'm doing here. Why should I stop?
Yeah, and he said about also wanting to get his money to his kids. He also had to almost trick it because he knew that his family would never take his money. So he had to find a way to trick his family into not knowing the money was from him. And it really is. It's just like I think he knew he was going to die. Spoiler alert. But he's like, before I do, I got to get this in order, and then I can die on my own terms in the middle of my lab after, that insane scene with the machine gun car.
Yeah. And it was very, like, you don't always like to see a character die, even if it's a villain. But boy, it was so rewarding to watch Jesse kill Todd. Because Todd was just such an awful human being. Mm-hmm. And to see him kill him, like, that is what you get, man. You needed to die. And so it was, Jesse got his moment there, and Jesse could have killed Walt, and Walt's just laying there like, it's your choice. You do whatever you want. And like for Walt to be like, I'm not manipulating you anymore. You're free. You can do whatever.
What did you think of El Camino, or did you see that?
El Camino was not nearly as good as I hoped it would be.
Yeah, I get that.
It was like a DVD special to me. Yeah. It's like the one extra episode to see, hey, what happened to Jesse? I felt like it didn't need to exist, but I'm okay that it does.
It's kind of just like a curtain call of, hey, here's a bunch of characters from this again.
Yeah. And I knew that they're going to get Walter. I knew they were going to get Bryan Cranston back. I was just waiting for that the whole episode. But and then, of course, it really is such a fitting end for him. I know that, there's some theories out there that like maybe he didn't die. He was shot in a spot that he didn't specifically need to die. You don't actually see him die. You just see the camera going up to the ceiling. Yeah. But it's exactly what they're going for. He died. Walter died. That fits with the story. The whole thing was a tragedy of one man's path to self-destruction. But the fact that he still like loved what he did. So he walks into that lab and he's just like has this emotional moment with the meth cookers and the meth lab, and to be like, yep, this is my castle. This is my legacy. Yeah. And then falls dead. And then what was the band's name? But that song Baby Blue plays, which was a perfect song to play. What a great ending. Great title card. I remember as that ended, I'm like, that's how you end a TV show. There's nothing else.
It's also just the great performance of Bryan Cranston, which I could do a whole podcast about the best performances of Bryan Cranston because he has such a range. I talked about my number 3 was Malcolm in the Middle, and Bryan Cranston was Hal. He was the dad of Malcolm in the Middle. That was right before he went right from being Hal to being Walter White. That was back-to-back years.
The actor himself broke bad. He's like, I'm gonna stop being a sitcom dad, and I'm gonna show you what I can do. Yeah. And holy crap!
And I'm blanking on his name. What's the creator of Breaking Bad's name?
Vince Gilligan.
Vince Gilligan, yeah. So I guess he was getting some pushback about hiring Bryan Cranston because they had just seen him for 7 years as Hal and Malcolm in the Middle, but he was pointing to he hired him based on an episode of the X-Files he was in. He said, well, I can see his dramatic acting in this one episode of the X-Files, and that's what he based his whole casting on, and it worked.
Yeah, and I think Bryan Cranston won like pretty much every time he was nominated for this show. I was just looking it up. I remember he won a couple times. He missed it in 2013. But yeah, he won a number of Emmys for being in Breaking Bad, and he absolutely deserved it, especially in that last season. So we talked about that episode, Ozymandias. There was one scene that was just like the most amazing acting where Walter calls Skyler, and the reason why he calls her is to, first of all, in his own way, to try and say goodbye, but mainly to like absolve her of crime.
Yeah.
And so he calls her, knowing that the DEA is listening in the phone, and he starts chewing her out. And like he's crying as he's doing it because he knows like this is the last thing he is ever going to say to his wife. But he's like chewing her out to be like, all you had to do was listen to me, and you couldn't follow orders. Like this whole thing, like he was abusing her. He was keeping her under his thumb. She was not an accomplice at all. And so he was trying to sell that the best he could. So pretty much with his tone and with his voice, he had to communicate anger and resentment. But with his face and his eyes, he was communicating pain and loss. Like, you're doing two things at once. It was just brilliant, brilliant acting. And I remember even Anthony Hopkins went on, he's like, this is some of the best acting I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I agree with him.
I definitely agree with him. I can't knock your pick. It's a great show. I just got into that. I watched it. I didn't watch it when it was airing. I watched it all in a binge a few years ago, but it was, yeah.
We should have ahead of time been like, hey, spoiler alert for all these. But I mean, we're talking about the finale of 6 different shows. Yeah. So of course we're going to be spoiling them.
Well, it shows like The Good Place just ended like last year, so that's why we didn't edit. We talked around some of the spoilers in that show.
Yeah,
I think if that's kind of my mentality. If it's recent, I'll be a little more cautious about that.
Yeah, like especially something that has a shelf life like MASH. Yeah, it's been around for a while. You have your time.
Yeah,
I'm actually surprised you didn't bring up Cheers again this week. I know that you like Cheers, and I know that was another one of those critically acclaimed season endings. Or series endings.
That was another good one, but I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it, and when I think of Cheers, I don't necessarily think of the ending right away. There's a lot of other episodes I think are better episodes of Cheers. I'm sure I'll talk about Cheers at some point again.
Wouldn't know. I haven't watched it. Did I make you mad again? you just got quiet for a second, and it's like, oh, whoops.
I'm just thinking, there's so many shows for both of us that we haven't seen. I think eventually we got to do another one of those watching assignments, and maybe I'll give you a Cheers one to watch.
Yeah, hey, I wouldn't mind that. I could watch some Cheers.
Yeah,
I like Ted Danson. I liked him a lot in Good Place.
Yeah, you can watch him 40 years younger.
Yeah. Hey, I liked him in 3 Men and a Little Baby and 3 Men and a Little Lady.
All right, do you have anything else before we jump into trivia?
I've got nothing else. That was it.
All right. So last week's trivia, I'll admit, was an easier one. It was Sarah Gilbert and Johnny Galecki, who played David and Darlene on Roseanne. They also played a couple on Weather Show. Not surprisingly, it's The Big Bang Theory. You know, Johnny Galecki is Leonard, one of the main characters. I would say probably co-lead with Jim Parsons. And Sarah Gilbert in the earlier seasons played a character to Leslie. And speaking of Leslie, kind of they did the same thing to her, but they did a mark on Parks and Rec, which was they realized this character's terrible, and they got rid of her right away.
Props to shows when they realize that. Like, oh, you suck. Get out of here.
Yeah. So my trivia question, actually, I thought of a new trivia question as we're recording it, which I think is better.
Okay.
The lead actor of one of the 6 characters that we talked about actually had one of the original Power Rangers named after him in real life. So, or like the character was named after this actor, and it's the lead actor of one of these shows. So the question is, do you know which Power Ranger was named, or which actor had a Power Ranger named after him?
Well, I have a 16.66% chance of guessing correctly.
There you go, Mr. Math.
I'll guess once we end it. But
all right, sounds good. If you want to do any comments or get in touch with us, we're TV Guys 1 on Twitter, TV Guys on Facebook, tvguyspodcast@gmail.com. Please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. Leave us a review. Tell us you like us.
Please, we need the validation.
Well, and also that helps other people see us, because then they'll be like, hey, a lot of people rate this 5 stars.
Yeah, these guys are pretty great, which we are. You're welcome, world. And yep, that's it. So thanks for listening. Go watch some of these shows. But until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
I'm reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.